Good evening. Welcome to Inside Out. This is where we take you inside state, local, and federal government to bring information out to you. Helping me do that tonight is Mark Uncapher. He serves as the Secretary of the Republican Central Committee, the statewide Central Committee. He's the Secretary. Mark, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Here we are in Montgomery County. No secret, we're post-election. Is the Republican Party have any chance in Montgomery County? Is there recruitment going on? What are your efforts to grow?
We have a very active. Look, first of all, the demographics are a real challenge and are uphill. We had some great candidates running this year, but quite frankly, in much of the country, areas that were red got redder, and areas that were blue got bluer, and we saw that kind of polarization, and that certainly did not help Republicans here in Montgomery County.
But the governor certainly did well.
He did.
Get him reelected as a Republican.
He got, I have the number, I got it from Jim Shattuck last night because they finished the count, 44.05, I think the number was in Montgomery County, which our target was 45%, and so we're pleased with that final result. That's actually with all the absentees and everything else counted. Was pulled out, which is a process they just finished relatively recently.
Now, the governor has made a splash here in Montgomery County with his proposal to widen I-495 and I-270. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've seen that transportation is the sort of preeminent issue on people's mind and a lot of concern. It's understandable, I think, because Maryland in general has the second worst longest commuting time in the country. Certainly Montgomery County, it's particularly a challenge. And there really is a difference of opinion in roads versus mass transit. His proposal, it would really essentially the governor's proposal would essentially extend the express lane. People have an option to go faster if they were willing to pay that exist in Virginia, are very successful there, move them into Montgomery County and free up traffic by opening additional lanes.
I know Ike Leggett's been a long time opponent to toll lanes because it discriminates against those who are less able to pay than those who are able to pay.
Sure.
Would there be any consideration to people of lower income?
Well,
in the concept of this?
There's really, I've not seen that there's a model to do that. It's interesting that the time sensitivity is really what it is you want to be fast, you want to get home, you want to get to daycare because you could pay the higher amount. In Virginia, it's a really broad cross-section of folks opt to do it. But it's important to remember when you open up capacity for people who are willing to pay, there's a diversion that's taking place that actually also opens up traffic elsewhere. So on those pre-existing lanes, there's less going forward. So really it's a benefit. So you don't have to pay if you don't want to. You can pay if you want to. If you don't pay, you get the benefit of the fact that there's more capacity to be able to go on the free lanes.
I know that's the theory, but in my experience going into Northern Virginia, where the HOV lanes go to the center, and off they go running. Those main lanes don't seem to be any better.
Well, there's a bottleneck. Right now, when you go across, there's a bottleneck, and it's precisely because that's where the HOV ends. So the idea would be to extend that. Now, obviously, it would become an issue. Some of the traffic would divert up to 270. Some of the traffic would continue on. If you do look farther into 495 beyond where that HOV takes place, you can see more of that challenge. But again, we have a huge traffic. You mentioned Virginia. One of the challenges that we have is the mass transit solutions do not save time when you're commuting to a job in Virginia. Certainly, bus rapid transit is not going to do anything for people who have jobs in Virginia. And that's really, frankly, where more and more Montgomery County residents are ending up having to work because of the failure to add jobs here in the county.
Well, I could see where there's plenty of room going down the divide on I-270 to widen that.
Correct.
To go into the Beltway.
Right.
I just don't see it in the Beltway
Well,
as the right-of-way.
unquestionably, there is a challenge. I mean, let me acknowledge there's a challenge in the breadth of the right-of-way at a couple of key points, one of which is at the American Legion Bridge. So one of the challenges in the proposals that come forward will be to come up with proposals. Now, there may be some decking, and I mean, there are a variety of solutions that would be able to do it for those particular choke points. And again, there's some areas where the right-of-way are constrained. For example, if you were to continue into Silver Spring or Holy Cross Hospital, there are challenges there. But the mandate that the governor has given is that you have to stay within the existing right-of-way and work through some solutions to be able to work through that.
One thing that one of the alternatives that I believe strongly in, not that that matters, but I don't hear much talk of, and that is the moving Jersey walls, so that you have lanes going south in the morning, then north in the afternoon. And that big machine, like on the Southeast Expressway in Boston and like north of Atlanta, comes down the road.
Yeah, that's actually done also here in this area on the Roosevelt Bridge going into D.C.
Oh, is it?
Yes, there's
Okay.
I think they shift. I think it's one lane, but one lane is
One
shift
lane
on
is
66
is what
coming
you
across.
accomplish, yeah,
Right,
usually.
right.
But that seems like it would be a lot more cost-effective going up I-270 to Frederick.
It would help, and that may be certainly one of the solutions that ends up getting looked at to be able to the investment that would require. I mean, I'm familiar with the Roosevelt one. I'm not quite, the challenge will be able to work through that as a cost-effective the investment to be able to do that, because you also have a period of time when while you're making the switch, you're basically taking one or two lanes completely out of service and then have that compression in order to make the switch between the two.
I know that one of the things that the governor has to be looking at that encourages him is the successful completion now just north of the Baltimore tunnels
Right.
on I-95 and how they broaden that all out. And they did it with big overreaching, high-rise
Right.
exits or whatever, and they created a HOV lane,
Correct.
north and south, that escapes the congestion that was I-95 Beltway and 95
Right,
north and south. And that came out beautifully. Terribly expensive. Took about 7-8 years to complete the construction because of the heavy traffic they have to accommodate while they're building.
Right.
But there was plenty of land to deal with. What they tore down was slums, and they took over some industrial yards that were vacant.
But as you mentioned, I mean, one of the options in really constrained areas is to do some flyovers. You certainly can see that over on some areas in the Virginia side where that's what has to be done, and that's a way of being able to keep it within the existing right-of-way footprint.
And that's what they did at the ICC where it comes into 29 particularly. There's a high flyover there so that they're up above the existing commercial businesses down below.
Right. It's worth it's also worth keeping in mind. And the governor did go forward with the Purple Line,
True.
and does that with the private-public partnership, with support from Montgomery County. Montgomery County clearly wanted that. The challenge with that will be is that because Montgomery County in general is not as dense and populated area as the areas where mass transit, you mentioned, for example, Boston, the way it was developed, it was much more densely populated. I think the densest zip code we have of all is in Tacoma Park. It's only about 10,000 people per square mile. You look around the country, when you're going from home to job to shopping, in order to drive mass transit uses, you really have to have a much higher level of density of population
To support it.
To support it. Not that there isn't a role, and my wife commutes to Silver Spring. I mean, it's not to say that there's not a very active part of the component, but that there tends to be an upper limit to the amount of use that people will have, because when you sit with a stopwatch. It just takes too long to go from point A to point B.
Well, I know that while my wife was using Metro to go downtown, she would get on in Rockville.
Mm-hmm.
The only station before that is Shady Grove. She would be lucky to get a seat.
Right, well.
And then by the time they got to Twin Brook, no one was getting a seat.
Right. They're clearly a capacity issue. It's interesting, one of the areas that we've saved the most because mass transit use has tended to go to, when you look at it, is flat to down over a longer period of time in our area. Where we've sort of taken the most people off the roads has come actually from telework, from people working from home, able to take advantage of, frankly, internet capacity and be able to do that. That's been probably taken more people off than the investments we made in mass transit.
My point was that it seems like there's a dense enough population that comes into Shady Grove.
Well,
let
me say
that it should be supporting
it is very
significantly.
Yeah, and
sufficiently.
There's a very important in terms of choices on mass transit. The Metro is an extraordinary resource, and it's something we ought to be we really need to fix it first before sort of looking at additional investments. One of the advantages of Metro is because it's been around since the 70s, if you say a look at the Orange Line in Virginia, is that along that path, the density has come up to be able to support that.
Yep.
It's, again, taken many years in order to do that. So you look at that, but it's still not as high as you generally have. So you're going to have up to 20% mass transit usage, but you don't have the density that really takes the, say, comparison of. I was recently in Berlin. Fantastic transportation system, density, what have you, but that's something that's existed for over a century, and that's the way they've organized, that's the way they've grown.
As do our older cities in the north, like New York City.
And New York, sure, yes.
And Detroit, Boston, Cleveland. It's time for us to take a quick break.
Okay.
When we come back, I want to talk about the bus rapid transit, BRT, option.
Sure.
You're watching Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith. With me tonight is Mark
Uncapher.
How can I not I have a mental block with this gentleman's name. Mark Uncapher. He's the Secretary of the State Republican Central Committee. We'll be right back.
I'm a veteran. We hit a mine in Vietnam.
As America's veterans face challenges, DAV is there.
My victory's been never giving up hope.
DAV helps veterans of every generation get the benefits they've earned.
I finally admitted, with my PTSD, I wasn't doing well.
So veterans can reach victories, great and small.
Now I wish I'd found DAV sooner. My victory is just enjoying each day.
Support more victories for veterans. Go to DAV.org.
Welcome back. You're watching Inside Out, where we take you inside state, local, and federal government to bring that information out to you. With me tonight is Mark Uncapher. He's the Secretary of the Republican State Central Committee, a former chairman of the County Central Committee at the same time. Mark, tell us about your involvement with the Republican Party and what your plans are going forward to grow the Republican Party. If you forget about Montgomery County, how do you grow it throughout the state?
Well, going around the state, again, we saw, I think I mentioned at the upfront, that the red areas got redder and the blue areas got bluer. And so where the party picked up a net gain of seats in the state Senate, it was actually in areas which were, for example, over on the Eastern Shore, where it was a Democratic senator, but Trump had won that area. And a district that had up in Baltimore County that we picked up. We also lost one in Howard and Baltimore County. So I think that the phenomena is that we really need to focus in our areas of great strength and build in Montgomery County with an infrastructure and attract good candidates to be able to make that case.
Who was defeated on the shore? Matthias?
Matthias lost,
Okay.
yeah. Mary Beth Carrozza defeated him. She was a great candidate, was a delegate, but had also worked on Capitol Hill in Washington and had been the legislative staff for Bob Ehrlich.
And she had a great support from Governor Hogan.
Yes, she did.
She did,
Yeah.
And which that I was, now you got to have the party loyalty and all that, but Matthias wasn't a left winger. He was with the governor on a lot of
Yeah,
subjects.
that's
and
true.
all
I
that,
mean, and
supportive of
that
the
was
governor.
part of this phenomenon. I mean, it was he was a more moderate Democrat compared to that. It's going to be an interesting challenge for the governor going in because in a number of districts, the Mike Miller centrist Democrats have been defeated in the primary, or in the case of Matthias, were defeated in the general election. And so you will, I think, have a much more polarized Senate than it has become over the years more and more polarized, but it's certainly more polarized going forward.
Well, that's a challenge for Mike Miller, but
It's a huge challenge for Mike Miller. It's also going to be, I mean, it's going to be, Mike Miller obviously goes back to 1986, back when he was first became president of the Senate. There was sort of more from folks, I wasn't in Maryland then, but there was sort of a, probably not, it wasn't called bipartisanship, but there was more of a balance and people worked together on bills and things have become more polarized and partisan. I mean, and legitimately, people have very different perspectives and are representing those perspectives in the Senate.
let me try again.
Sure.
What is the Republican Party's strategy in Maryland going forward?
Well, I think that as, again, we talked about, we're going to, we recognize that as the Democratic Party, if we look at the phenomena with Ben Jealous, if the party moves more and more to the left,
Right.
Certainly Mark Elridge identifies as a democratic socialist, very proud of the fact that he got that, that there will be opportunities of being able to pull in together more moderate and centrist Democrats to the right candidate when the right candidate comes along. That's going to be the challenge going forward, looking for those opportunities.
Let me touch on one other thing that this segues into as far as red or red, blue or blue, and that's the redistricting, congressional redistricting,
Right.
which was a key factor in this election because with Governor Hogan now controls the proposal anyway before
proposal,
it goes
right.
to the legislature, and then they can do some chopping and redefining. But the appellate court has just recently said that the 6th district, Western Maryland and parts of Montgomery County, was not drawn properly, and consideration for the people in
Right.
Congress to each other, it was not taken. It was ignored so that they could get what they wanted in the Democratic blue district. The governor appointed an independent commission, sort of, just yesterday or the day
Well,
before.
he's looking now for people to participate, but yes, that's his intention to make that proposal, yes.
Goal is both to have Republicans, Democrats, and independents on that, to make recommendations to him,
Right.
and that he could go forward from there. Personally, I think that makes an awful lot of sense.
It's going to be interesting because now the litigation focused on the intention for District 6, and so that's really the kind of smoking gun that caused the court to act. But districting is a bit of like a balloon. You move air from one area, you end up in another area. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of square that. So District 6 could move into Carroll County. That's actually more where it was before. Carroll County is about probably pretty close to, if not the most conservative county in the state. I don't think they've elected a Democrat in a long time. It right now is represented by Jamie Raskin. District 8 goes from Tacoma Park, from Montgomery, right up to the Pennsylvania border. Now, if the District 6 moved over into Carroll County, it would frankly change the coloration of that district pretty significantly. I mean, it would pull out of Montgomery County, move over there.
And Raskin would expand,
Right.
as you say, with the balloon through Montgomery
Or
County to the river.
That's one particular dynamic. Whether that's, on the other hand, that does change the composition of one particular district. It's interesting that you look at a map, though. It's District 3 is probably
I was
the
waiting for you to get-
weirdest one in that you literally
Congressman Sarbanes.
Sarbanes District. It's a tiny part of Montgomery County. It goes through the Baltimore Harbor. It goes up to, I think, Harford County. There are all sorts of areas you can't actually drive from one point to another. You have to, in I think at least 2 points, you have to have a boat to go from one part of the district, whatever. If ever there was a district that probably is indefensible, it's that particular that
Right.
district. But that's not the subject of the change.
I know.
That said, there may be some movement that takes place there, because if you move things in one area, for example, Raskin may end up taking all of Montgomery County, and or not all of Montgomery, but moving over to take that part of District 3 that's already in Montgomery County.
See, the history there is back in 1990 redistricting for District 3, and it was Ben Cardin at the time.
Right.
Is they moved it so it made an inverted C around Baltimore to East Baltimore and back through Howard County. And that was, to get the demographic that was favorable to Mr. Cardin.
Right.
But now it comes down 29, it weaves itself into part of Montgomery County as well. And I'm sure John Sarbanes wouldn't mind a more compact district. I certainly think as a candidate, he'd be strong enough to
There's a
get
practical thing.
reelected.
You talk to voters in some of these strange districts, and certainly run into this in Montgomery County. There are a lot of people who have no idea that they're in they don't really know who their
Right.
congressman is.
Right.
Because it's just kind of hard to identify unless you're staying on top of that. So probably there are a lot of people in Montgomery County who are in Sarbanes District who don't realize that until Election Day comes, and
That's what's on the ballot.
that's what's on the ballot.
Yeah, it can be very surprising. One other huge thing that we're going to be facing very shortly is when the Kirwan Commission on Education is released.
Correct.
What are you thinking there?
I have been disappointed that there was not more conversation, because originally about that. Now, the original plan was to have the recommendations come out before the election and would obviously generate some discussion. They were delayed, and it will be coming out shortly. The preliminary expectations are that Montgomery County would take a huge hit in the amount of state aid that it would get from that it gets from the state, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, already the county Office of Legislative Oversight is projecting a $200 million deficit going forward. That's not even taking this, because expenses are going up faster than revenues. That's not even taking into account the challenge that will take place here. So it'll be an interesting issue whether or not how the Montgomery County delegation responds to those changes, because on one hand, teachers union and a lot of interest groups are very supportive of what Kirwan's recommended, the broad Kirwan recommendations in terms of pre-K and redistribution. But if it comes at the expense of Montgomery County, that's going to be a huge challenge as well.
See, the state constitution mandates that we provide a public education to all, and it should be in parity,
Correct.
one county to the other.
Right.
And understanding that some counties can't afford to put the money into education per student that Montgomery County can. But
Although it's interesting, Montgomery County and Baltimore City are essentially at parity. It's within 2 or 3 percentage points of each other, and are the leaders among all the various counties, are at parity in the amount of money. Now, Baltimore City, I should say, gets a huge percentage of its budget paid for by the state. Montgomery County is more middling in that, and other jurisdictions have to pay more of their own freight in order to do that. So the case that Baltimore City, which is frequently the one that's sort of pointed to, they're certainly well funded, or they're certainly not disadvantaged vis-a-vis the other jurisdictions in the state.
That's a good point to make, because I'm sure, yeah, people have the opposite view.
Right.
That because the condition of the schools, I mean, the front page articles this week have been about keeping the heat on
Well,
in the schools. All over the city.
And that is the disconnect of something as basic as keeping the heat on. It's not for lack of funds. Now, the buildings are older and all that, but it's also interesting that within Maryland, that the Howard County schools overall are now getting better results than Montgomery County. And they're certainly not I don't think even in the top 3 in terms of the amount that's paid per student.
Well, the demographics are much different.
Well, it is the demographics has changed.
Yeah.
But although Howard County is, be careful, because Howard County is a diverse community. It is not,
yes,
yeah.
But as far as highly educated population that
Yes.
makes more money than a lot of people in Montgomery County, sure, they have a large diversion as far as Asian and Middle Eastern populations and African American, but they don't have the Latino input that we have here in Montgomery County, and that's an expensive proposition with all of the ISOL and all that.
Right.
So I don't know.
But I think it addresses the issue of money in itself. Is not Baltimore City has the money to keep the heat on. Whether or not it has the management expertise to do that is, I think, more the challenge.
The issue. Okay. Before we wrap up, a quick note on, we have a new county executive.
Right.
Your thoughts about Mark Uncapher?
Well, I think it's going to be a real challenge for him. Somebody asked me a while ago, do you think he has the collegiality in order to be an effective county executive? Certainly we're used to Ike Leggett, who was really much more accommodating. And I have to say my response to that was, as a Republican with Donald Trump in the White House, I'd be hard-pressed to say that somebody who is a little bit rougher edges from time to time is something who can't get things done. So wish him all the best as county executive.
Great.
Although he should expect a loyal opposition on a whole bunch of things.
But the entire county council is Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. All right, Mark, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming in. Pleasure to meet you.
Great.
This is the Secretary of the State Republican Central Committee. You've been watching Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith. We're on here at Channel 16, 7:30, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Have a good evening.
Thanks.